Okay, so so welcome to Project Kenten. What I'm going to do is look at the project aims and beneficiaries, the approach and framework, resources used and generated, outcomes and achievements, and then look at lessons learned. And then what I'm going to try and do is pull back so that what we have is time for questions and answers. So Project Kenten started from here. The problem to solve was post-harvest losses, which I'll come on to in a moment. And what we wanted to do was take the problem and try and make that into a series of solutions that could do something about youth unemployment, try and create the toolkit for entrepreneurship, and then from that, actually try and develop products that would give people viable options to launch their own business. So that's really where we're at. Now, the problem that we've been looking at is this problem of post-harvest losses. Now, in Ghana, the average is 40% of the harvest is wasted on the route to market. Now, by the way, I would add that in Britain, about the same figure is lost after we've purchased the product from the supermarket. So it's not just a question of the developing world having problems. The world as a whole has a problem. And the waste across the world is really equal to about $1 trillion of decent food, which could feed 870 million people. And that's very important. And may I say one other thing about this, and that is that the project started, as we all know, the year before last. And it was very clear as we started into the project, working in the field, that the wider global context was actually getting worse. And so with the Ukrainian war, for example, wheat harvest of Ukraine, which was one of the biggest contributors to the African wheat requirement, was collapsing. And so instead of it being just an issue of post-harvest losses in a Ghanaian context, worldwide, this has really started to get worse. And this is why when we really got going, we needed a framework to use. And the framework that we used was this, design thinking. So we start on the left-hand side with the problem. That means that we went out and did a lot of discovery interviews with people all over the place. We were very fortunate in having Lugu and Abigail, both of whom are entrepreneurs in Ghana. Lugu in Accra and up north in her understanding, and then Abigail took us to Kumasi, and we had a really strong link up with UCC as well as RMU over in Accra. So we're looking at the problem, we're talking to a lot of people to make absolutely certain that we understand exactly where the problem is at its worst and start to think of viable options going forward. And I'll come to that in a moment. And from those, we would develop them and then deliver them as solutions. And if we get it right, then what we found as a problem could become the pain or the problem, which is the underpinning of a specific business. And it's always good to have a business that answers a problem or literally addresses the pain. So as you can see on the bottom, the process was understand the problem, and then, as we'll see in a second, start to map from field to fork using persona interviews, and then starting to test, pack, and market validate. And I'll come on to webinars in a minute. This was a really exciting part of the whole story. We really did find people very receptive to this. So both in Durham University with undergraduates and also with RMU, and then over with UCC, which I'll come back to in a moment, we did a field to market value stream analysis. And this literally starts with soil quality, what can we do, the harvest itself, and then actually starts to look at storage, which was very weak, packaging and unit, very weak as well. And then on to route to market, looking at transport, and then a lot of work with the students, literally tens of persona interviews, well over 100 actually, with queens, as they call them, women with real experience out in the markets. And from that, with two particular products, and that is onions and tomato, we were tracking just how much of the product sold in the market was coming from abroad. Imported products in tomatoes adds up to about 400 million US dollars every year, and onions about 100 million US dollars every year. Now, by the way, those numbers have climbed. They're growing all the time because of the currency fluctuations and because of instability across the globe. But this is a key point, that when we are talking to potential investors, we need to get across the point that the market size for just two of our produce selected, tomatoes and onions. Now, I bought Zoe's Kitchen, which is a recipe book from Ghana, and I found that about 90% of the recipes in this well-known book on Ghanaian cuisine, about 90% of them either had onions or tomatoes in them, or both. So this market size of about $500 million US dollars of imported products gave us a lot of encouragement that we were doing the right things. So now what we were doing was looking at a couple of ideas once the harvest takes place. And the biggest idea and the most progress we have made is Kenten dry techniques. And we did an awful lot of work in the field, led by George over at RMU, and Felix, that's Dr. George van Dijk, and Dr. Felix as well. They've done some fantastic work. I've been really, really encouraged and impressed by that. To dry the product. So a tomato, for example, is massively water-based, as we all know. And so if you dry it, then you solve at a stroke the post-harvest loss. What that then needed, so a green light on that, and then what we needed to do was really understand how we could package these. Incidentally, we started with some plastic packaging. You can see that here. But in the backdrop, you'll see some Kenten designs. Now, we were really fascinated by bringing some young people in to do all of our design work. Somebody out of Accra and somebody else volunteered from London. And the two of them designed what you can see in the backdrop for the produce. We like it, but then again, that's why we called the project Kenten, to use a specific African name rather than something generic like RMU and Durham University Business School project. We're on an amber light with that because the project, the product validation has been going on. But what we're now trying to do is engage with potential investors. And so that brings us to Kenten Veggies and Scale Up. And it hasn't got a green, it hasn't got an amber, and it hasn't got a red, but we are paused while we are looking at new options going forward. Now, what have we actually delivered in all of this? What resources have we used? What resources are we making available? Well, we feel as if we made a decent contribution to the IOU program overall. We had a fantastic relationship, dare I say, with GB Pie over at UCC. They were very welcoming, and we offered to do some talks based on what we were doing at Project Kenten. I think it's fair to say those went really well. Wilbur invited me to talk at my old university, St Andrews. That was really exciting too. So we had a lot of engagement with other projects and other universities beyond our own, Durham University, where I'm a fellow, and also RMU in Accra. We also made the contribution of Project Kenten. That was interesting. Let me tell that horrible story about myself not understanding that tilapia is a fish. I thought because we talked about vegetables that it was a vegetable. But what has come from that ridiculous error on my part is that we started to look at the feedstock that tilapia farms are using. And we discovered that some of the dried cassava that we were working with was actually really good. So instead of actually just giving a farm some of that waste product from post-harvest losses, we were looking at cassava as a feedstock for tilapia farms. And in actual fact, with Wilbur, we had a look at a couple of ideas which we haven't progressed, but we think this is really exciting. And in the right-hand corner, you'll see a storyboard from workshops that I've put together with George. And these are now standing at 10 workshops, which I'll come on to in a minute. And there's a lot of content that's going to be made available for everybody in the IAU program. So what we've got here is 10 workshops, webinars, which are now going to be available. And this is the sequence. We start with what is agriculture and how is agribusiness shaping up to be high tech, to be urban, to be really exciting for career paths, logistics and supply chain management, the basics. And then this transitional, what are we going to do in the run up to 2050 and transformational? How can we make this happen? So a lot of turnaround ideas in those sessions. Each session is about 35 minutes to 40 minutes. And what we're doing in each one of them is giving people the opportunity to ask questions. And then this helps some of the lecturers like George, etc., doing it. We're hoping to get all of this launched for everybody by the end of February, but I'm in Ghana in the second week of February to launch it. And by the end of February, all of these will be available online. This is just an illustration of what I said earlier. You can see the big learner driver. Well, I'm going through the presentation, and then the learner driver asks a question, and this is where, because they're all tape recorded, then lecturers can use this to their advantage to really focus the understanding of the cohort in the room. Now, where have we've covered a lot of ground: agriculture, agribusiness, logistics, supply chain, and really tried to understand what we're going to have to do by 2050, which is 2057 over in Ghana and 2063 across Africa, in transitional and transformational. And this is really serious, a new logistics and supply chain textbook for developing markets, which gives us career pathways and gives us more support for entrepreneurs. So in those sessions, summaries of the key learnings every single time, relevant questions for discussion, and then also other resources that we're going to add in there, which is books worth reading, podcasts worth listening to, videos worth watching. So in conclusion, we feel that we've used a lot of hands-on field work to enhance the entrepreneurial skill set of the guys we've been working with. I think that's been really positive. Green light. The webinars, the content has been commented by many people. I've sent it through to Cranfield University. I've sent it through to a few other universities. The guys at Huddersfield, the guys at Bolton have been really supportive, as my own university up at Durham. And we really want to make this accessible to others. So if anybody wants me to give a couple of online talks on this, then give us a shout. And then finally, and this is where we've stalled really, and that is we were hopeful of getting ourselves ready to go to market with product. And that is what we're working on now to see if we can find other options. What have we learned? That post-harvest losses is bigger now than when we started. Food and protein security is a big problem. Climate, COVID, and conflict is a problem for all countries. The market size in Ghana for these staples, and I'm only just mentioning tomatoes and onions, 500 million US, that's a big market. And that's important for investors to understand. And we feel that awareness is needed for agribusiness, that it's urban, that it's high tech, and that it's a really exciting career. Investment is needed, otherwise a lot of this will stall on the page or in the webinar. And we feel we've got a minimum viable product, and we also feel we've got the route to market ready for scale. So without further ado, I hope that covers the ground, and that should be 15 minutes. So thanks very much.